I am Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, presented by Stakes, joined by one of the best guys in the sports media business. I've known Jeff Drummond a long time. He has covered Kentucky, I don't know how many years. It's been longer than I've known you. One of the best in the business. You're great at what you do. You're a superhuman being. And we're catching you at a time where, boy, things are pretty red hot with Kentucky football, Jeff.
Yeah, a little bit different than when you and I first met. Going
Yeah.
back to those days, our fortunes have changed quite a bit for the Wildcats during football season. So it's exciting. But we're both a little longer in the tooth and got more gray hair going on. But it's great to be back on here and talking football with you again.
Well, I mean, let's start with surreal things, okay? Watching that whole Twitter feud between Calipari and Mark Stoops from, I'm sure you're probably sick of talking about it, but it was just wild to watch that from afar and look up and say, hey, the football coach at Kentucky seems to be more popular than the basketball coach.
And this shocks people when I tell them this, but from time to time in our business, we get asked to go on radio in other markets, especially when the team's playing somebody, from Louisiana or Arkansas or wherever. And basketball always comes up.
Yeah.
And going into this season, even before this flap happened with Calipari and Stoops, I had to explain to these guys, nobody here is talking about basketball anywhere. I said, you don't, and they've got a really good team on paper.
Yeah.
That should make a lot of people excited. Now, as we get closer now to tip-off, people are starting a little bit. But the people here have always had a deep, deep thirst for a good football team. And Stoops has come in and given that stability, been here 10 years, getting them to not just bowl games, which for my entire life, the fans here said, just win 6 games. That's all be competitive. Don't get embarrassed. Win at least 6 and go to a bowl game. But now they're going to, January 1st bowl games, and people are throwing them out before the season as a dark horse, East contender, and people just keep raising that bar higher and higher. They're 5-2 right now, and there's a little bit of disappointment in the air.
Yeah,
and to think about that 15 years ago, you would have cracked up.
Yeah.
If you said Kentucky fans are disappointed with 5-2.
Was there a moment or a game when you're thinking, man, this guy is really going to change it at Kentucky and win big? Because, I mean, you could see early they didn't leave him a lot of talent. You could see he was building on defense. You could see they were getting a little bit better. But was there ever a time you're like, man, this guy could really win big at Kentucky?
He was so close to being gone before that could happen.
Wow.
A lot of people don't realize. I think it was like that year 3, maybe. There were bumper stickers around here saying ditch, Stoops and stuff like. They wanted to get rid of the AD and Stoops and everybody because it's microwave society. We all know that you got to win right away. But they hung in there with him and turned that corner. But the single moment I think is when they go to Louisville and they're 28-point underdog. I want to say 20-something. It feels like 28 stands out in my head. And they beat Lamar Jackson and those guys. And the Heisman Trophy winner coming back. That seemed to tell everybody, okay, there are new heights that can be reached now.
Yeah, that was definitely a changing of the guard for Kentucky football there, and really in that state, I would guess. I mean, it seems like Kentucky's had the upper hand from that point on.
Yeah, really have. That shifted in a big way. We kind of thought that might be getting more competitive here soon. People were excited about Satterfield and what he was doing at Louisville, but they've even slipped a little bit now. So it's tricky to know whether that's going to become a really competitive rivalry game again anytime soon.
I think the other surreal thing is watching Kentucky's offense. I mean, we've seen them years where they were starting converting receivers at quarterback, and Randall Cobb had a turn on the wheel way back when, and these multi-dimensional athletes, and they just didn't have a guy. And then they go and get Will Levis, who's not playing at Penn State much and was kind of more of a running guy was the way it sounded like when he came to Kentucky. You look up and there's first pick of the draft talk. I mean, crazy stuff, man. James Franklin's not an offensive whiz, but he knows what he's doing. How in the world did that whole thing develop where he's not playing at Penn State? He comes to Kentucky, and now, you can't turn on a football game on Saturday afternoon without hearing Will Levis's name mentioned and being talked about as the first quarterback or maybe the first guy off the board. What's that ride been like?
It's been a little crazy. We were talking about it while we were sitting in the lobby waiting for practice to end a couple of days ago. When Will Levis first came in here, there was legitimate debate about whether he was going to win that job or Joey Gatewood.
Yeah.
Who transferred in from Auburn. Everybody thought he was maybe the next Cam Newton type, physically guy. And a couple of other guys in the mix. And there was debate for all three of them. And we just cracked up once we got to see that the season get underway and watch Will Levis perform. It's like, this was never even remotely a contest. This guy is so physically gifted, so put together from the mental standpoint, which often gets overlooked at quarterback. I mean, he's just got all those qualities to him that check the boxes, I think, when the NFL is looking for a guy to take with a high spot. Now, I never would have dreamed it would be maybe number one or the first quarterback off the board. But there seems to be a lot of, wind behind that right now.
Yeah, I think there is. I look at the Kentucky offense, and just that group has not been whole much of the year, Jeff. I mean, you had Rodriguez missing the first month. When he comes back, Levis misses a game. How are they heading into the Tennessee game in terms of health and just having all the pieces back? And how important is that for them to have everybody back to be able to gel as they go down the stretch?
This is the closest they have been to 100% all season. They played without Chris Rodriguez the first 4 games due to a couple of different disciplinary actions. They've had a revolving door on the offensive line, which is probably the biggest story of the whole season. They have not had that vintage Kentucky big blue wall, that for 5 years, they've had one of the best offensive lines in all of college football. And this year they've just kind of been piecing it together and trying to do the best they can. It's gotten a lot better the last 2 or 3 weeks, but some people have asked, is that just because Rodriguez is back? Rodriguez can make an offensive line look really good. A 2-yard loss turns into a 3-yard gain. A simple 3-yard gain turns into 8 or 9 with Chris. So you put that together with a young but really talented wide receiver core and some nice tight ends, and they've got a lot of weapons right now, and they're all healthy over there, provided one of their tackles, Jeremy Flax, who's usually the starter, is expected to come back and play Saturday. That will be a big boost for them.
Jeff, the other thing that's kind of indicative of the changing times of Kentucky football, you just touched on. I mean, I look at them, they've got those freshmen, Key and Brown, are just so explosive. I mean, the way that he's starting to put this together where, okay, they've got a power running thing over here. Now they're getting those explosive guys. Those kids, Brown in particular, is just a nightmare. You don't want to kick to that kid at all. Can they put all these facets together long-term going forward, do you think?
Well, you would like to hope so. They still haven't had that kind of complete game yet where they get all of them clicking at the same time. And this will be a heck of a time to do that, going to Knoxville when they need all hands on deck. And probably they need their best offensive game of the season. So if Rich Scangarello, who's the new offensive coordinator, can get all those guys functioning at the top of their game at the same time, it's interesting to see what that would look like, because we've only seen about maybe 50% strength of the UK offense this season.
I think the thing that concerns me about their offense heading into the game with Tennessee is this, Jeff. I know Tennessee's pass defense has been much maligned, but if you start looking at sacks as pass plays, that takes the edge off it some. Now, having said that, Anthony Richardson went nuts on them. Bryce Young went nuts on them. I think both those guys threw for 450 or so against Tennessee. And Levis is certainly better than Richardson, and maybe as talented as Young in his own way. But the thing I'm concerned about is pass protection. How big of a concern is that? Because Tennessee does get to the quarterback quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's the thing I think Kentucky's probably the most concerned about there is it's not a really strong defense. So to my understanding, they like to sell out quite a bit and kind of conceal some of those back end weaknesses by blitzing early in the down sequence. They like to get you in 2nd and 13, 3rd and long. And those are situations where Kentucky just doesn't function well. They need to stay ahead of the chains and, be in non-predictable, I think is how the coaches talk about it, non-predictable scenarios where the opponent can't just pin its ears back and come after you. And it's a concern because Levis at times this season has been running for his life. And to his credit, he makes some plays under that kind of duress. And I think that's something that the NFL scouts like a lot, but it can also lead to some mistakes. And if you make a mistake here and there against Tennessee, that game can get away from you in a hurry.
Well, and the other thing is they just play so quickly. Do you think that Kentucky can control the tempo in this game? And that's on both sides of the ball thing, right? You got to get 3 and outs against that offense, and you've got to keep the clock moving if you're Kentucky. And I think that's where they lean on Rodriguez a lot. I mean, both teams play very different tempos. How do you think that plays out with those teams just being so opposite in the speed in which they like to play?
Yeah, I think Kentucky wants this as slow as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at, they're one of the slowest offenses in the country by design anyway, but especially facing Tennessee, I think you're going to see them using almost the entire clock every snap and shorten this game as much as possible. Their recipe for winning is shorten the game and no turnovers and try to come up with a splash play either on defense or special teams.
Yeah, speaking of defense, I mean, that has been where this program's identity has been built ever since Stoops took over. I don't remember what the streak is, but we were talking about this on our Wednesday night show this week about, I think Kentucky's allowed 24 points or fewer in, 10, 12 straight games, something like that. And I'm sure you probably know the number. But Tennessee's a different animal. Where do you think they can give the Vols problems?
Well, I think personnel-wise, Kentucky may be better suited to face that kind of offense than anybody Tennessee has seen so far. And it sounds kind of crazy when you think that they just played Alabama, and everybody thinks of Bama, Nick Saban and his defense. You can't get any better than that. But there's some indications this season that may not be a vintage Crimson Tide unit over there. I think there are kind of a lot of signs pointing that way, and it'll be interesting to kind of measure that by how Kentucky does against Tennessee. But they've got athletes at every level who are capable of covering. And they could come up with some exotic stuff like one defensive lineman, down or 2 down, and the other 9 or 10 guys standing up. They've worked that into each of the last 2 games, and I've felt like it's in preparation for what they're going to see against Tennessee. And then just showing this kind of umbrella of coverage in the back that says you're going to have to work and earn your drives for points. We're not going to just play you man on man and let you throw 45, 50-yard passes. If you want to take 7, 8 at a time, eventually, and that's been the secret to Brad White's defense since he got here. Kentucky's big on field position and making you go 75 or 80 yards because they know that college kids at some point in a 75 or 80-yard drive that takes 10 or 12 plays are going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
The statistics bear that out over and over. And Kentucky does it quite well. Every time we talk to the opposing coaches and players about playing the Brad White defense, they tell us it's just a pain. It's not fun to play against.
Yeah. What is the strength of their defense this year?
It's the veterans in the middle, the 4 linebackers who have played a crazy amount of games. I don't have it here in front of me, but the 2 inside guys are like around 100 college games, 2 outside guys. I think maybe pushing that too. They're all like super senior guys except Weaver. So some of them have been playing 5 or 6 years now. If they had Jacob Jones, who he's injured right now, he's one of the inside guys, so that doesn't count so much. But the guys who have been behind them have been playing at a really high level. So that group of 4 linebackers has been the secret to their success so far.
Other than Jones, are they pretty healthy for this game?
Yeah. Defense looking good. There might be a guy or 2 down the depth chart that isn't able to play in this one, but all the other guys are ready.
Jeff, give me a storyline that maybe we haven't talked about or people haven't picked up on that you think might be important in this game. I mean, I've mentioned special teams with Kentucky a lot this year just because of UK's explosiveness in the return game. Anything like that really stands out to you in this matchup that's been under-discussed?
Well, they've got a kid to watch for on the Kentucky side of things that I think could factor into this in a big way. Jordan Lovett, young guy at safety, who in high school, I want to say his junior year, he had 15 interceptions. And people know for high school, really for any level, you're talking about somebody with 15 interceptions. It just doesn't happen. Like an absolute ball hawk. I think he had 18 his last 2 years combined. And since he started at Kentucky, he's been known more as kind of a thumper, a real good guy in run support, a sure tackler, but we haven't seen a bunch of those interceptions yet. He's a guy, I think, in this game, especially with the way the Vols like to push the ball down the field and throw it deep, could loom large because he is certainly due for a pick here or there.
Okay, Kentucky looking to finish strong, win or lose in Knoxville. I mean, it seems like the Cats are a regular fixture in a decent bowl game every year now. Okay, coming up next, road trip to Missouri, which I think is similarly styled in a lot of ways. Not as good as at the quarterback position, but kind of a stingy defense. Probably better to run the ball than throw the ball. But I think that's a game that Kentucky should win. Shouldn't have much trouble. What's that?
I should add, that's been a trouble spot for Kentucky. You know how teams just have a place where they go, and for whatever reason, maybe it's the way it falls on the schedule after another game or with another big game following it. For whatever reason, that trip to Mizzou has always been tough for Kentucky, win or lose.
Yeah, well, and I think this year Missouri's defense is pretty underrated. Now, offensively, they're not much. And kind of like Kentucky, it depends on a lot of times explosive plays, although I don't think Missouri's running game is as good. Vandy the week after that, I'm not thinking Kentucky will have a lot of problems there. Then ending with Georgia, which could be interesting. Kentucky matched up probably better with Georgia than anybody not named Alabama a year ago, and then Louisville to finish. How do you see this ending for the Cats after the one in Knoxville?
Well, that one at Mizzou is a big one because it can go a long way towards determining if you're in a bowl game that has people excited. And we talked about this earlier. It's strange to even be saying this, or maybe it's a bowl bid that's not that attractive to Kentucky fans. A lot is going to hinge on that game. Going into the season, everybody had that Georgia game circled because they lost a ton of personnel from the national championship squad. They were coming to Lexington. For whatever reason, Kentucky typically plays Georgia a lot better than some of the other traditional powerhouses in the league. So fans really had their hopes set high that maybe you could see an undefeated Kentucky team and undefeated Georgia in one of the games of the week. But, the Cats let one slip away against Ole Miss. They didn't have Levis and lost to South Carolina. So that game has lost a little bit of its luster up here. But I'm sure, especially if Kentucky can find a way to steal one in Knoxville, that game suddenly becomes huge once again.
I was looking. I kind of wrote Kentucky off as a college football playoff contender, but I was looking on 538 the other day. If Kentucky wins out, I think 538 gave Kentucky something like a 35% chance to make the college football playoff. Now, look, that includes winning in Tennessee and in Georgia, but interesting to think about.
I think anybody, if you offered that before the season, 35% chance, they would all said, I'll take it.
Yeah. Actually, that game, I'm sorry, the Georgia game is in Lexington. I read that wrong. So yeah, that'd be very interesting with two losses to see if Kentucky could pull that off. Gut feeling, what happens in Knoxville Saturday?
I'm going to be picking the Vols because I think they've earned that respect based on what they've done so far. They're playing at home. Neyland has kind of been a house of horrors for Kentucky over the years. For the last 5 years, Kentucky's had the better team than Tennessee, and they've only won 2 games. So there's kind of a little bit of that element that's still out there. It's a hurdle that the Kentucky program still has to get over with Tennessee for whatever reason. They've done it with Florida finally, but they still haven't quite got there with Tennessee. So I'd have to give the edge to them, but I think the public perception and maybe the line on this game is exaggerated a bit due to Tennessee beating Alabama.
Yeah.
And me not being completely certain that this is a vintage Nick Saban Alabama team. Maybe Tennessee will prove that it is, and they take care of business. But I think this is a game that's going to be really close, a lot closer than people think. Maybe even lower scoring than a lot of folks think, because people now assume that Tennessee is just going to get 50 no matter what. But Brad White hardly ever gives up that many points to anybody. So I think it comes down to taking care of the ball and possession, really. Time of possession and no turnovers. Kentucky's got a shot.
All right, I can't let you out of here without talking basketball for a minute.
All right.
We are knee deep in basketball research on our channel. A lot of movement behind the scenes. I think, to me, potentially it's a 5-team race in basketball, but I think probably it's going to be between Kentucky, Arkansas, and Tennessee is my gut feeling as we're sitting here doing this late October. What's your thoughts on how the top of the SEC shapes up this year?
That sounds pretty fair to me. I know some people have stretched it to 5 or 6 teams, but I think you've got the 3 main ones right now. Typically, though, as you know, someone gets in that mix that maybe we weren't thinking about.
Yeah.
So much. It almost always happens. And like in recent years, it seems like it's been LSU a few times. And sometimes that unbalanced schedule gives someone an opportunity to sneak in there and be a bigger factor. And then they gain confidence and all that. But I do think I would have to put, Arkansas and Tennessee right there with Kentucky to start things out.
Well, Kentucky, it's a weird year compared to most of Calipari's years. We pointed this out on our Kentucky preview. When's the last time Kentucky brought back its starting point guard for another year? I mean, has that happened under Calipari?
That's a really good question. Most of the times he's kind of encouraging those guys to move on and go ahead and live their dream, I can't think of one, and there may have been one here in recent years that I'm forgetting about. One guy that you could kind of technically put in there is Tyler Eulis. But
Yeah, that's true.
he
Yeah,
split time with Andrew Harrison on that
yeah.
great 2015 team, and he wasn't the typical starter. But most of these guys have moved on under Calipari after that first season.
Well, this is the day and age where continuity is not a big thing in college basketball. And look, you always know Kentucky's going to have talent. He brought in another great recruiting class, which is no news. But I look at them and I'm going, I think they're very interesting. But between that and the fact that they've not only got a starting point guard who's played a ton of minutes in college basketball between Kentucky and Georgia, but they've also got the returning National Player of the Year. That doesn't happen often. You put two of those on one team, and particularly a Kentucky team, it is very unfamiliar territory for Kentucky, and I think that could really play to the Cats' advantage. I don't know how much traction that gets in Lexington, but that's something that just jumps out at me when I look at that situation on paper, and I think that could be big.
Yeah, his best teams since he got here in 2010 have had that blend of a few veterans, even if they're not stars, but just enough veterans to kind of balance against the great recruiting classes, and then that elite young talent. And the thing that's kind of different about this season, like you were saying, not only does he have some veterans back, but they're like elite veterans, especially with Oscar in particular, National Player of the Year.
Yeah.
A guy that averaged 17 and 15 last year. It was just one of the craziest things I've ever watched, the way that kid was rebounding every game. And then with Sahvir, who has some limitations because of his size, but when healthy and when he's right, he's really underrated player, I think, for just running an offense. His assist to turnover ratio is always really good and amongst the best in the country. And he's a pest on defense, which one of the reasons why it kind of fell apart last season is he took a couple of blows and had a couple of concussions from screens trying to pick him off, as a defender. And he just wasn't the same guy at the end of the season. So everyone here is hopeful to see, a full health season out of him at the point. And of course with Oscar, who's had his knee scoped here recently. And we're interested to see if he can duplicate, what he did last year. There's even Chris, this is crazy. There's talk around here right now, and it's legit. It's just not rumor that he might come back next season.
Wow.
Regardless,
that would be crazy.
Of what happens. Because the NBA doesn't have a whole lot of openings right now for a 6'8" guy who plays the low post and rebounds. It just NBA roster don't have that guy anymore. Yeah. And unless he kind of blossoms into a face-up, ball-handling, shooting type of big man, and he's got a nice soft shot, but I don't know if it's going to be nice enough to give him a chance in the NBA, hitting NBA-range three-pointers. So with NIL, now maybe he can stay for another year and make quite a bit of money at Kentucky instead of feeling forced to go into the NBA or trying his hand overseas.
We're living in weird times where Kentucky's returning point guards and maybe having a 3-time National Player of the Year.
Yeah, for sure. Like a few years ago, Cal would have never even let you imagine that happening. But I think he's realistic when it comes to Oscar. He's a unique talent that's probably going to be remembered as one of those guys who was a incredible college player, but just didn't translate to the next level.
A couple more guys I want to ask you about. Kentucky was probably as banged up as I remember last year. I don't remember all the specifics. I know Wheeler missed some time, had a couple other guys that were out, and one guy that missed the season was CJ Frederick. Mm-hmm. And I'm interested to see how healthy he is and how he fits in this year. What's your take on that before the season?
Well, we were told before the start of last season he was the best shooter on the team by a wide margin. And, Kelly Grady was on that team. That kid
Yeah.
was an excellent shooter. So that made us go, wow, okay. And from what we've seen so far from the Bahamas exhibition trip and a little bit of sneak peek at him here in the preseason, every shot he takes looks like it's going in. He's just one of those kids with a beautiful stroke, like the Klay Thompsons of the world. I'm not comparing CJ Frederick to Klay Thompson's talent level, but the shot itself is just a work of art, something I could have never dreamed of with my busted J growing up.
The other topic I wanted to hit before we end the show, Jacob Toppin has kind of gotten some love as a sleeper breakout guy nationally. Got a lot of parts on that team, but it seems to me like if he hits the ceiling people are talking about, there may not be any beating Kentucky next year.
Well, he could be that kind of X factor, 6'9", almost 6'10", can jump out of the gym. I think the pro day, the scouts had him at something like a 45-inch vertical.
Goodness.
Just does crazy things. And he spent a ton of time the last few months working on his shot. He went to work out with the NBA players in New York prior to kind of throwing his name out there and seeing what kind of feedback he got. And the pros told him, we love everything right now, except the shot has to be a lot more consistent and physicality. And those are two things he's really kind of been working toward this season. And the shot, you can tell that this guy has worked, tirelessly in the gym, because he's come out in the Bahamas games they played and both in their Big Blue Madness and the blue-white scrimmage. And he's had a really sweet-looking three-point shot. If he can do that, that changes a lot of things for Kentucky and the kind of combinations Calipari's going to be able to play on the floor with Jacob Toppin away from the basket and facing up.
Before we leave, quick shout-out to our presenting sponsor, Stakes, which is Stakes. We are making predictions every week in the Stakes app on upcoming games. We got plenty in there for football. We want to see if you guys agree or disagree with our picks. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Sign up for Stakes. Place your prediction whether you're for or against us. Use the invite code Southeastern14. When you sign up, you'll get a double welcome bonus. Okay, Jeff, any parting thoughts, any loose ends on football or hoops that are worth getting into before we wrap up here?
Man, I think we hit just about all of them there, but really, really interested to see how this game unfolds on Saturday. There's so many cool storylines that could be there. Kentucky could wind up getting blown out, but I have a feeling that they could be a lot better than people expect and maybe even have a shot here. And if they win this game against Tennessee, this kind of becomes a true rivalry. I've been saying for a long time, Kentucky hasn't earned its half of the rivalry. Their fans view Tennessee as a huge rival, but Tennessee's fans don't really see Kentucky that way because Kentucky hasn't done enough to like interrupt their plans. Now, if they can win this game and potentially wreck this dream season, this suddenly becomes one of the better rivalries in the conference.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, you know your stuff. You could even talk baseball if we wanted to get into it today. I won't do that to you. But in any case, thank you for joining us. Tell folks where they can find your coverage at Cats Illustrated and what you guys have coming up for the Tennessee game, as well as hoops and whatever else is on the horizon.
Yeah, we're at kentucky.rivals.com is the easiest way to find it. And you can follow me also on Twitter, JDrumUK. For updates on all those things. And we'll have all kinds of breakdowns and analysis and reviews on Kentucky, Tennessee Saturday and some stuff even leading into basketball as we're set to play the first exhibition games.
Well, Jeff, it's the first time we've had you on the show here at Southeastern 14. I'm kicking myself. Why didn't I think of this earlier? You and I have known each other a long time.
Yeah.
Hopefully it won't be the last, and look forward to talking something. It's going to be a fascinating fall for Kentucky, one way or the other, between hoops and football. And I know you guys cover it better than anybody in the business.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure to be on. Good to see you again. And Anytime that you'd like me to visit, I'd be glad to be with you.
We will make it happen. I will hold you to that.
All
Okay.
right.
He is Jeff Drummond of Cats Illustrated. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching. If you like this, hit the subscribe button. We cover SEC football, basketball, and baseball wall to wall. Best way to get that, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 14.